Welcome to today's webinar, How to Improve Testing and Save Valuable Developer Time, sponsored by Applause. I'm Jenna Sargent, Social Media and Online Editor at SD Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sdtimes.com website about 24 hours after the event. Secondly, if at any time you have questions about or during the presentation, you may submit them using the Control Panel's question tab. In this webinar, Mike McKethan, Director of Quality Engineering and Automation at Applause, and Mike Plachta, Senior Manager of Solutions Engineering at Applause, will discuss how to ensure the entire in-sprint testing process is done quickly and accurately. Now to get things started, I will throw it over to you, Mike.
Thank you so much. We're actually going to start with some more introductions. Mike, maybe you can start, tell a little bit more about yourself, your experience, and then I'll follow.
Sure. Mike McKethan, I'm Director of Quality Engineering and Automation at Applause. Been 20 years in quality world, starting off in the automation ranks, moved into test management, and in the last 5 years really been focusing more on the quality engineering aspect and helping companies shift left, improve their time to market and quality overall.
Great, thank you. And my name is Mike Plachta. I'm part of our solutions consulting team. I work with a lot of our customers on ensuring their quality strategy is improving over time and talking to them about how Applause can help them. Personally, I started as a software engineer, so I had a lot of background around that a few years back, and then I was also running a few engineering teams, and at some point I just moved to consulting, which is where I am today. So today we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to talk about the problem definition, that's going to be Mike, and then I'm going to go through some survey statistics from the market, talk about how in-sprint testing works, and then we're going to continue with some best practices, talk a little bit about how Applause supports that, and we're going to finish with the Q&A. With that, I think I can hand it over to you, Mike.
Okay, great. So one of the first, of course, level set, right? As we've all heard terms for shift left quality and quality engineering. Some of you may have various definitions and everything like that. But what we're talking about today, as we'll get into it, is how can we save time, which will be more process oriented than tool oriented. Some things that we've seen in the market and working with clients across Applause's vast network, right? So the shift in quality assurance, a lot of you grown up in quality assurance groups like I did, where maybe 40, 50 man teams, and they all had to test at the very end of a cycle, and you had big testing parties and locked the door and ordered pizza, and everyone had to test all night just to make sure that everything was right, and hoping that things were right before the product went out the door, right? So of course this movement of shifting left and quality engineering and baking in quality from the beginning rather than trying to test quality in, is what we're talking about today. And so we'll share some key things that we found in our experience as we've helped companies shift left and things they did and did not do. And so that you can take that and go forward with it. And of course, I'd love to talk to you more about it afterwards.
Okay. And with that, I think we can start with a short survey of that we executed in the past few weeks. So we had around 1,800 respondents from different roles, including QA, product, and engineering, and the survey was conducted globally. And there are some interesting results there, and let me go through that. So we see that shift left is already happening. This is not a trend. This is not something that just started. This is something that had been here for a while, and a lot of teams are implementing that. What shift left obviously might mean different things for different teams, but I think everybody wants to test earlier or make sure that they deliver a high quality product or bug-free product, if you will define it this way, or maybe they are thinking about how to implement automation, how to put automation in that strategy, how to test closer to the development, and all sorts of things like that. 86% of our respondents said, yes, shift left is already happening for us. So I think that's one interesting statistic there, that everybody's aware of that term and everybody knows it, and then people not unfamiliar with it. So that's really important.
Yeah, I think the key there might just kind of interesting to going back to that point, right, is the way, we're seeing shift left catch on fire, kind of like the way agile caught on fire, right? But you would have clients to say, yeah, we're agile with a little a, right?
Yeah.
Meaning they're trying to adopt agile practices, but they may not be exactly sure how to and what it means. And what we've seen is clients say they're shifting left with a little s, so to speak, is that they're trying to get off the ground, but having trouble in various areas. Everyone wants the dream, but defining it and implementing it is a different thing.
I agree. And, also it's fine to do just baby steps, right? If you even start with something really small, like, okay, let's have 1 or 2 tests even automated, that's fine. Or if you define a new column in your Jira that requires every single story to be tested for 20 minutes using exploratory testing, whatever you do to shift left can help. And that's going to be, like Mike said, the small s, but from my perspective, that's moving you forward. So that's really good. So another one, for large companies releasing frequently who shifted left, how has it helped with dev QA product efforts? And we see a couple of things that really were differentiating themselves. One of them is reducing the amount of bugs released to the end users, and that's a very important metric. 57% said yes, it has an impact on reducing the number of issues. And from the quality standpoint, from an end user standpoint, that's something that's really important. Also for the QA teams, it lets you maybe focus on some more interesting things from the development, less bug fixing, more working on the new features. So all those kind of things that everybody wants to do. If you are able to reduce the number of issues, that's really great. Then the second one is, save the costs of later stage bug fixes. So, typically, I would say not a lot of development or engineering or QA researchers think about it, but let's say managers or directors, they will. And when we look at it, cost of fixing an issue early is relatively slow. You just need to maybe go back, a few days back in the codes. You still understand it sort of, and you don't have to do a deep dive there. You just go and fix it. If you have the same issue reported 6 months down the line, you're probably somewhere else in the project. You have to go back into the code, understand what does it really do again, and then start thinking, okay, how do I apply the fix, not break anything else that was created in the meantime, and then you spend a lot more time, probably requires more people to be involved. Therefore, it's much more costly. 48% said, hey, it does reduce the cost of fixing bugs. That's also quite an important metric. And the last one, reduce the need for hot fixes. So in my engineering times, like hot fixes were very common, which didn't say a lot of good things about the team, but that was the reality. We had a team and we were making mistakes. We were working under constant pressure from the product or from the business side. Hey, release faster, release faster, release faster. And that's, working under such pressure that often creates issues. And if we are able to shift left and reduce that noise, reduce the number of hotfixes, that's something that helps a lot everyone, not only the development engineering, just releasing some of the pressure, but also the business, making sure that they deliver on time and then they can move forward with quality. And I think one of the last ones, the new code development. So so we asked developers, how much time you spend on fixing or testing, perhaps, and what impact does it have on your productivity? And they said they spent at least 8 hours. I mean, if you look at this, over 50% said they spend at least 8 hours a week fixing new issues, or testing new features. That's something that could be shifted to another team or somebody else, and the developers could work on something that they're really interested in, just developing new features, just working on the code, and testing can be done by somebody else. And I think with that, I'll hand over to Mike, and we'll talk about the pillars of successful shift left strategy.
All right. So again, kind of really focusing in on today about some really process-oriented or fundamentals of the shift left strategy. Most people, when they think about shift left, they immediately go to, I need tools and I need automation. And yes, as you can see, as part of our foundational layers, you do need that, right? That is a critical part. But the pillars of a good shift left strategy can mean a couple of different things, right? And my quote up there from Aristotle, whether he actually said it or not, I like to believe he did, right? That quality is not an act, it is a habit. And so we'll kind of dive into each one of these and really talk about that, but that's an overarching theme that if implemented right is really, in my opinion, the most successful part of a shift left strategy. So let's dive in and talk about each one.
So do you want to talk about quality ownership? I mean, I think those just
I
three.
was going to dive in. Yeah, go ahead. We'll go to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just we're going to talk in the next few slides about those three overarching items. The whole team ownership, quality, moving
Right.
the QA beyond the sign off, and requiring the quality champion at the top.
Yeah. So when we talk about quality, oh, there we go. We talk about quality. Oh, I'm sorry. We're back at quality. There's back up one for me. Sorry.
Sorry about it.
There we go. Okay, so quality ownership. So first and foremost, fundamental part, right, is whole team ownership of quality. So quality isn't just the responsibility of one role, right? And so we saw this in just the maturation of software development life cycles in general in the last 20 years, right? So anyone who hasn't been a part of quality assurance or testing or development in the last 10 years, like I said, there used to be just this focus is, hey, where I literally hear this all the time, right? That quality is the responsibility of the testing group. And it's their job to make sure that everything is correct, right? And so quality ownership means that we all take a part in quality. And we have that mindset of moving beyond a QA sign off, right? I mean, QA should be able to sign off on the test results that they provide, right? But the overall quality is something that you have to start from the beginning, has to be part of business development and testing in their overall effort, and really be a mindset rather than something that is just done at the very end. And really, it is super hard. If we have any QA managers on here in testing, it really requires a quality champion at the top. Right. So, of course, having management buy-in from the engineering level, from executive levels, again, making it an organizational paradigm shift from one role's responsibility to we all have a stake in quality ownership is something that has to start from the top and trickle down. It's hard. The only part of that really one of the hard things of shifting left is if you're going to shift a quality mindset from the testing group upstream. So, quality ownership. Overall from the entire organization. First and foremost of the pillars and probably the most important. If you don't have this, all the automation and tools that you've acquired won't mean much in the long term.
Agree.
All right, so the next one, it's easy and it may sound accurate, executable, and valuable features, right? Getting it right from the beginning. And also Pareto's principle of 80-20. We see a lot of organizations that don't prioritize either their features and or their test cases, right? And having that collaboration at the beginning, which also leads to behavior-driven development. So having that quality mindset is one of the first pillars, right, that we talked about. So if you're able to achieve the quality mindset and the vision and everyone's moving forward, you need that collaboration, right? So quality mindset might be the first, but the second one is the collaboration and communication. What's valuable to our clients and who's using the system. How are they using the system, right? I can't tell you how often I go into clients and I would say, what's the value of this feature? How often are they using this, right? And so many clients would say, well, it was a feature in our backlog, so we're implementing it, right? And so the prioritization, understanding how your clients utilize that feature from the beginning, and then prioritizing that work can really go a long ways. And BDD, the three amigos, business development, test, right? Making that shift also from a QA to quality engineering mindset, and your QA shift from a quality analyst, quality assurance analyst to a quality engineer, which is more of an advocate and has that collaboration with the business, with development, right? That's going to be really key in overall this and getting it right from the beginning as well.
I really like that term. So quality as a mindset, because I think a lot of organizations, it's actually engineering or QA professionals' job to make sure that everyone understands that, because quality as a mindset has to touch all the different roles, product, business even, and then engineering, QA, operations, etc. So all of those different roles need to think about quality, and that's really important. Another thing that is also interesting maybe to add here from my perspective, I often hear we want to have 100% automation coverage or something like that, and I'm always like taking a deep breath, like I just did, and thinking, okay, that one's gonna require some education, because 100% automation is not something you should aim for. First of all, a lot of people don't distinguish between test coverage and code coverage. Those are two different things, and they just think 100% automated wildly. But at the end of the day, you should think, okay, what does make sense to automate? What doesn't make sense to automate? What does make sense to test manually? And when does it make sense to test things? And then think about it. From that perspective, I really like that Pareto principle, 80-20. Making sure that you can follow that with automation, with shifting left in general. That makes a lot of sense to me. Right.
All right, next up. So automation first mentality. So this is actually something different than we see than just normal automation shift left strategy. So most people, which is a normal goal in your automation maturation, is that they'll say, we have a goal of N-1 automation strategy, right? So you go through a sprint, you take the past, or the PASSED, the test cases that passed, execution, they go into an automation backlog, and then from there, the automation team works on those test cases and hopefully gets them automated and put into the build process, your pipelines that you have established from DevOps, and that's great. But how do I get to an automation first mentality where I'm having in-sprint automation, which is something different than N-1, right? And this is really, when you think about, of course, TDD and then automation at the functional level, we look at API and UI, but if we're all familiar with the automation pyramid, Google testing pyramid, we want to have a more focus on unit testing, API testing, and then a lower focus on UI testing, right? And then saving the space for manual testing at the top. And so thinking about automation first. Now this is a developer and a tester or a quality engineer aspect, right? So we're thinking about how we're going to make this automation friendly. What are my automation hooks, right? Even if you're React type application, there's ways that we can plan for automation to be successful, right? So when I'm getting the code, I understand how the system is architected. I understand how my automation tools are going to be able to interact. Therefore, I can actually plan on my automation running within the sprint and being successful on the specific test cases that I felt were automation friendly or automation worthy. As Mike talked about, not everything should be automated, right? But then you can see those automation cycles and automation efficiencies within the in sprint testing, right? You don't have to wait for the N-1, which is, again, just something different that you want to plan for automation from the beginning rather than rely on it later. Because what this really kind of leads to is why we're big fans of this is also what we talked about here in a little bit with BDD, is a lot of times the N-1 approach starts off great, but then you run into what we call the automation bottleneck, right? And usually what this is about cost, right? And most QA groups cannot afford to have that many, SDETs on their payroll. And so what we see is it starts off N-1, then ends up N-3, then N-4, 10, and so on and so forth, right? And then you've officially hit the automation bottleneck. And so planning from the start can help you avoid that and make your automation truly scalable.
So
All right,
Mike,
I
do you
might have.
want to talk about that natural language or BDD, or do you want me to cover this part?
Yeah, let's see. There we go. It's a slow refresh on my part. Sorry. Yeah, so natural language BDD. I'm looking over on my slides because my screen's not updating. So we talk about natural language, right? So natural language is something that I recommend even if you haven't implemented automation yet, right? Because natural language helps us to normalize the process of creating features and test cases, which again, our first pillar of successful automation strategy is quality ownership and mindset. The second pillar is communication, right? And part of this is communicating how features come down the pipeline from our business partners, how they communicate to development quality engineers, but then also the way we write test cases and scenarios is normalized. So this helps you because again, not everything should be automated, therefore things will be manual. And making sure that everyone is writing test cases in the same format and style that can be executed manually in a crunch, right, is scalable as well. I can move people into my organization, my sprint teams, because of this normalized language. People can get up to speed faster, and at the same time, it also lends to an automation first approach, right? So you can see here is what we're talking about is how we can mix BDD with page object, model, which is the most prolific, design pattern in the market today within automation, promotes single points of maintenance, reusability, and scalability. Right, and you can see here how the examples translate down into the page objects into reusable functions. And also providing non-technical members a way to get into the automation game, right? So we talked about a little bit earlier, you can fall into the N-1 automation bottleneck, but if you're utilizing a framework and approach and an automation first mindset that says, hey, we want to automate what the right things are to automate, and we're going to provide a scalable mechanism that allows all of our QEs, which had made the shift from QA to QE, which is a mindset and something like that, but also allows us to retain those members that have vast functional knowledge, but not that much technical skills, right? And so being able to have this, the automation catching the defects as fast as possible, as Mike talked about earlier, is reducing those churn cycles, right? As we talk about the time that we're saving here, communication introduces churn cycles. And when I talk about churn cycles, I'm talking about the miscommunication and the functional misalignments that lead to, we have to go back and fix this, right? We have to go back and fix this. It could be a design churn, it could be a functional defect churn, but all these things that we're talking about today help to reduce those churns, therefore reducing your test cycle times, therefore reducing your time to market, allowing you to release faster, and be more directed by common language and features, understanding everyone's on the same page, collaborating to understand, and hopefully seeing better quality as a result.
All right, perfect. I'll move to the next one then.
All right, and these are really just about kind of best practices within Agile and shift left too, right? As we talked about communication. So continuous feedback and then fail or learn fast, right? If we want to be more of a positive track about learning fast rather than failing fast, but it comes down to communication, which is our second main pillar, right? So prototyping with the three amigos, right? We talk about the business, the development, and the QE, the quality engineer, which is in a quality engineering mindset, right? So the quality engineer, again, has to take on more of a role, right? They're collaborating with the business to make sure features are written properly, understood, correct format, acceptance criteria is understood, it's aligned, working with developers to understand the technical implementation, data, automation hooks, right? Automation first mentality. And so the QE is taking more of that quality leadership role, right, within the sprint teams. And then, of course, code quality from an automation perspective, CI/CD, getting everything set up from that perspective as well. Learning fast by the quality of our code with the automation we've established is really secondary to the communication up front that needs to happen at the beginning of sprints and feature development.
Perfect.
And last but not least, again, some of these may seem basic, but again, as Mike and I see multiple clients across the applause spectrum, again, just little ones that aren't being done. So we want to bring these to light. Maybe you're doing some of these, maybe you aren't. Maybe some of those you aren't. Retrospectives, again, communication. Sometimes we have to have those tough conversations, right? And not all things are rosy, not all sprints go well, but as long as you have that mentality of learning from our mistakes and moving forward and then implementing those in a learn fast, fail fast mentality and not repeating. Simple, but so effective in reducing that churn that we've talked about. Idea boards. A lot of times we see, I got off a call with an assessment today from a client, right? And they just said, I have all these ideas, but I have no way of expressing them, or they don't feel they're empowered to express them. Idea boards are a great one, right? And these are literally boards where people can put their ideas for features and process improvements. And if implemented, should be rewarded in some way or fashion, right? And this is how you get everyone feeling like they have a voice and feeling like they have a mechanism to convey process improvements, communication improvements, even features and ideas. Predictive analytics and just analytics on in general, right? We go back to what we talked about. 80% of your clients use 20% of your functionality. So we need to know what that 20% is. We need to prioritize that 20% in our feature development and our test execution, which should drive, again, from a priority approach perspective, asking ourselves two questions, right? What's the likelihood of this test case failing? What's the impact to the business if it does, right? And establishing that priority approach that drives our manual execution and our automation development and execution efforts as well. And then, of course, you're really getting into the pie in the sky stuff. Of course, AI is the trending with tools and being able to predict, understand, machine learning, going beyond just if our clients use a feature, but then how they're using it, the types of data that they're using. And then in the biz DevOps world, right, really getting ahead of the users and really providing that complete loop of in-user feedback and usage into our feature development real time. Of course, this is kind of coined as DevOps 2.0 and where people are moving.
All right, perfect. I would add from my perspective and from my experience, from what I see with our customers, is that the three areas that are shown on this slide, the CI/CD, MVP, and BDD, are the most common ones implemented by our customers as shift-left strategies. That doesn't mean they are the only ones. There's a lot more, and one of the things that we see is really resonating is also implementing more and more in sprint testing. So, historically, I've seen the QA teams come in towards the end of the sprint when product is ready or almost ready to be released or maybe move farther in the stage. And right now we see something else, something where the developers want to have their feature tested as quickly as possible by a number of testers on a number of on different environments, things like that. This is also something that has been enabled by technology, because what we see more and more often is feature branches that are deployed to a separate environment where that new code can be tested. Also some automation around that. So all these kind of things. So that's why, Applause also implemented with some of our customers in sprint testing, where we have teams of testers located, in different places with different sets of devices used by customers. It can be, 15, 20 testers sitting all across the states or even globally, who come in as quickly as the developers are ready. One of the nice things about it is that it's integrated with Jira, so the developer just moves the story to another column that says, I don't know, test globally or test with Applause or something like that, and we automatically get notified about this. We schedule the testing or do the testing almost immediately, and we give the feedback to the developer in the same sprint. We either report an issue and move the story back to the open, or just complete the testing, come up with some test cases, document them already, and move it to the past column. So from my perspective, it really saves that developer time, so the developers can focus on building new features, doing less testing or less extensive testing. They can rely on somebody else to do the testing. That's also important because, I being an engineer myself, I know that engineers have a special bond with the code. I know it might sound funny, but we know how it works. We know how to test it, and sometimes we're not going to find issues. And if somebody else finds them, it's gonna be easier for them. And obviously we're gonna be like, oh man, issues again. But that's something important too. So then a couple of advantages, first of all, it's happening in sprint, not at the end of the sprint. It's really during the sprint that the code is testing. It's streamlined process. It's integrated with the Jira workflow. It's really nice from that perspective. It allows to avoid that context switching. The context switching is something that we talked about before, where you come in a few weeks or maybe even a few months later to fix an issue. So if we detect that issue early, or that the engineer is still in that same mindset, they can fix it quickly. They understand how the code works. And then it can be executed at different stages of the SDLC. So literally anywhere. And just to talk about that, feature branches can be tested, or the whole code can be tested on developing the branch, and that's going to happen obviously before you merge into production, before you ship the product to the users, which avoids quality issues and which helps you with that quality mindset. And with that, I think we're going to move to the Q&A. So I see we've got a couple of questions. Mike, we're going to have a question for you. What process should teams use to get consensus on Pareto? What items are the key 20 that produces the 80? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, so really what I like to recommend is, is if you can't actually track user activity within your application, right? There's a number of tools out there that you can install that actually track clicks, right? And so even from a menu click perspective, if you're able to follow clicks within your application, you can at least see, even from your menu perspective, how your clients are utilizing those features. And then the second one is focus groups, right? So being able to find focus groups, being able to get that collaboration based on who your users are. We have to define personas first, right? We have to understand who is using our software, what are those personas, and then filling in those gaps with feedback from those personas, right? So tracking live action within our application, and then using focus groups are the two key ways that we've done it here at Applause.
Yeah, I think you actually answered that question maybe earlier when you said that 80% of the users use 20% of the functionality. So once you're able to identify that 20% of the functionality, you're going to cover 80% of the use cases used every day. And that's really important from that perspective. And that's what I would do. I would just start by prioritizing what's important to my end users, and then deciding, okay, once we have that, we can decide how do we improve quality on this? How do we make sure that it works? How do we move forward? And then you can decide what's the best strategy by looking at these stories, because it depends really on your product. Some products can be easily automated. Some products are really hard to automate, or even impossible to automate. With IoT, it's a whole different world, I would say. Because of the complexity related to connections and how these devices work, etc. But if you start with prioritizing, that's always good. Not sure if we have any more questions. I'll
see a few more questions in here. One is, what types of organizations are best suited for Applause in sprint testing, and are there special requirements?
Oh yeah, I can take that one. As long as you're doing sort of agile, and you have a regular cadence, whatever that cadence is, a weekly, bi-weekly, every 3 weeks, that's probably okay. We would probably look for you to push, I don't know, maybe 20 stories a week or 10 stories a week, something like that, just to make sure that something gets tested every week. We want to be as close as possible to the development, but we don't want to impact negatively the time spent on fixing the issues by the developers. So I would say, as long as you push something consistently every week, that's fine.
How many sprint teams can you support with the in-sprint testing solution?
As many as you want. There's no real limitation. You know, from our perspective, we always build teams for our customers, and I would say that there's not really a limitation. So if you think of applause, if you know the company, you will know that we have an extensive community all over the world. If you don't know the company, then I will only say we've got over 750,000 testers globally that are working with us. So we're always capable of creating additional teams and having more people there, training them on what does a specific team do and making sure they can support it.
Great. Another question is, how should I be thinking about regression testing when I shift left?
Mike, I'll let you take that one.
How should I think about regression testing? So it all comes back to our priority approach, right? So we've done our analysis, even if you haven't done your analysis from your end users, right? Communication with your business to understand what they feel are the most important to the users, right? And then prioritizing those test cases. So again, we ask ourselves two questions on every test case. What's the impact to the system if this test case fails? What's the likelihood of this condition within this test case occurring? From there, we create a matrix: critical, major, medium, low. And then every time we get new regressions or we have regression cycles, we always start with our most critical functionality first. Because a lot of times people look at regression as all or none, right? And which can make release meetings a little awkward if you're like, hey, I'm at 75% regression coverage, right? Which is, oh my gosh, the first thing everyone's asking is, well, what's the remaining 25%? But even if you can walk into a meeting and say, you know what, out of our regression suite, we've covered all critical, major, and medium functionality, and the only test cases that we didn't get to test were low priority ones, we all have a better sense about the quality of the application releasing it and can make better decisions that will impact our company. So always prioritize everything within your automation and execution strategies.
Great. Another question I see here is, what are the best ways to use Jira for shift left testing needs?
I would say, I would say if you define a good workflow, that's something where what helps on a day-to-day basis. Jira also has a number of tools to manage the backlog, the priorities, things like that. So if you do any kind of agile, where you have planning meetings, where you have retrospective meetings, where you have product demo meetings or sprint demo meetings, that always helps, and you can see how are you improving over time. Is you can also see your team velocity. You can do retrospective right in there. So there's a lot of different ways to use Jira to improve your shift left, and it really depends on what you want to focus. If you want to focus on a day-to-day basis, make sure that we have a workflow that's consistent for every single story. Make sure that you have a definition of done created, and that everybody follows that when really moving that story to the done column. Make sure that you prioritize your product backlog. I mean, that's probably a product owner's job, or product manager's job, whatever that role is called in your organization. But make sure you also prioritize things in the sprint backlog, and that's more on the day-to-day team basis, because some of the stories will depend on the other ones. You're not going to be able to complete them, etc. From my perspective, and from the good practices I've seen before, also adding these columns such as, I don't know, QA or automating or even building the test cases, that think of that as a definition of done, but adding these and making sure that you cannot really skip those steps. Make sure you always think about that quality. Make sure that that you're never gonna go with a story without just creating a few test cases there, without just testing it on at least one environment, without maybe thinking on how do we want to automate it, or do we even want to automate it or not.
Great. That is all the questions I see that have been asked. Thank you both for a great presentation. Again, everyone, that was Mike McKethan, Director of Quality Engineering and Automation at Applause, and Mike Plakta, Senior Manager of Solutions Engineering at Applause. I would also like to thank Applause for sponsoring today's webinar, as well as the attendees for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jenna Sargent.
Thank you.
Thank you.